After I put up my last video, a friend sent me a message in the inbox. He wanted to know what my opinion was on a certain matter. It's something that's a very contentious issue among artists and photographers in particular, photographers and videographers. And it's not quite a new issue as you might think, because this is something that has been going on since some of us were children. That's for those of you who are late 70s and early 80s children, just like I am. If you remember the Michael Jackson concert, the Eight concert, I can't remember what it was called, but I think Michael Jackson, Dionne Warwick, I can't Stevie Wonder, a couple of other people got together to throw a an aid concert for Africa, and some of the media that was used to advertise it included pictures of starving African children, war, famine, the usual thing. So from then up until now, there has been this debate. There's been this debate about what is the proper narrative of Africa that needs to be told, and who is it that is the right person to tell that story. Because the images that we get of the malnourished, war-torn Africa are stereotypes that are perpetrated by journalists and media men and people of a foreign origin, people from Western countries. So I guess the argument is that if we had images and media content that was grown by more homegrown talent, like if you had Nigerian journalists telling Nigerian stories or Somalian journalists telling Somalian stories, that we might have a more objective bent about about these stories, might have a much more nuanced and truthful version of what it is that goes on the African continent. Now, I'm not here to pitch a tent one way or another, although I understand where all the tension comes from around these issues. But for me, I think that the underlying issue is that we haven't made it commercially viable to tell African stories. And once we find a way to make a narrative commercially viable, I think that is when we're going to start seeing a change in these things. For instance, CNN and the BBC, they have there's a program on CNN. I think it's Talking Africa, and I can't remember what the BBC version of that program is. Well, they have a similar program. So I think that the reason why we're beginning to see some more of those stories being told about an enterprising Africa, Africa that is taking innovative ways at solving social and political problems, is because now it's commercially viable to tell those kinds of stories. I think it's because there are people like you and I, young Africans, who are interested in that and who have the ability to pay for that. Because remember, we get to see that because we're paying for DSTV subscription. So I think that we're going to see a change in these things when we make our stories more commercially viable. And it goes beyond the media into other aspects of our lives as well. Like there was a time when there was this big uproar on social media. I saw it on Facebook and Instagram, where I think Marks and Spencers or one of those companies had started selling chewing sticks, and people were really up in arms about how we don't value our own culture. Foreigners have value our own culture more than we do, and have started making money off of it. And my own opinion, I think, was not a matter. It's not a matter of us not valuing our culture per se, but some clever guys in the United Kingdom just found a way to market this thing in a commercially viable way, and so all the discussions around cultural appropriation and things like that, in my own opinion, don't really hold, because it's just business. If we had found ways to make that a commercially viable enterprise, then things would have taken off on our own end. For instance, in Abuja, if you pay attention, there's already packaged gari has been sold in Abuja for a very long time. Or I can say, well, at least for the last 4 years. I think there are lots of stores where you can find packaged gari and packaged beans and things like that. So I think people are finding ways to build commercially viable enterprises around that. And so I think that that's the solution to some of these are problems. yes, there might be kinds of new colonialism, or whatever it is it's called, but we are only going to be able to solve the problem when we start putting the element of business into it, because naira and kobo and dollars and pounds and whatever currency it is you have, money basically is a universal language, and once we start speaking the language of money, it's then that we solve these problems. So we find a way to make African stories commercially viable, then all these things about which image of Africa is portrayed in the media, or whether we have enough African journalists in the field telling the stories, I think will just be a thing of the past. So that's my own opinion on the matter for now. And like I usually say, nothing is cast in stone. That's how I feel now. Who knows what the future may bring on the subject.